Good evening. I'm Forrest Sawyer, and this is Day One. Tonight,
dozens and dozens and dozens of men with machine guns suddenly popped out of the ground and started spraying us.
it was a battle that would change the course of a war and the lives of the men who fought it.
You know, when the bullets crack over your head and snap the air, hit the ground beside you, you know they're aiming at you.
And I thought, oh, Jesus, they're all over us.
They were determined to kill us all. And I was determined that wouldn't happen.
Now, from that battle comes a story you'll never forget about soldiers, young and brave, in a place called Vietnam. Tonight we have a special broadcast, the story of a battle that you probably never heard of, but it was one of the most important battles of the Vietnam War. Americans fought and died, and many of them sacrificed themselves to save the men around them. This is the story of the men who fought, of their remarkable heroism, and of their journey back to the battlefield that, in a way, they never really left. It has been 18 years since the war ended in Vietnam. 18 years since Americans witnessed a desperate evacuation from the roof of the American embassy, the end of the first war the U.S. ever lost. Today, Vietnam is alive with peace. Farmland and jungle have covered the scars of war that marked the countryside. But there are still scars on the lives of America's veterans who fought for their country and returned home to find their sacrifice had become an embarrassment. One of those veterans is retired General Hal Moore, who led one of the most important battles in Vietnam. Moore carried a dream back home with him, a dream he held for almost 3 decades.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have now landed at Hanoi Airport.
A dream that was finally realized only weeks ago.
Back again. What we dreamed about, Joe.
The old warrior who first came to Vietnam to seek and destroy now returned with his men on a mission of healing. They walked again on the old battlefield that left them changed forever.
Men who fight shoulder to shoulder together in battle. They're brothers for life.
They walked the streets of Vietnam's capital, Hanoi, the city that was, during the war, enemy headquarters. One of those who returned is Jack Smith, now an ABC News correspondent. Then, he was a 20-year-old private.
I feel as if I'm on the planet Mars, and I used to try and kill these people, and here I am visiting their country after a war that I didn't win. I just feel very strange.
They found, to their amazement, old adversaries ready to let the past be gone. They found a new generation who see the war as ancient history and Americans as charming strangers. And when they made their way to the places they knew before, they found a piece of themselves.
Didn't we have a chopper come down right here?
I crashed right there.
Was that you?
But what they really traveled 14,000 miles to find was still further away, hidden in 2 tiny clearings in a remote patch of jungle. No American has been allowed to return to this place before. Many Vietnamese believe that in the night, ghosts passed through here. It was on this ground that over 4 days and nights in 1965, the men of the 1st Air Cavalry and North Vietnamese troops fought and died in the first great battle of the Vietnam War.
It's about as close to being to hell as you can get and come out alive.
Listen to your friends crying out for help, not being able to do a thing.
When it was over, American soldiers had both won a great victory and suffered a terrible defeat.
Well, your men did a great job.
Their leaders trumpeted the victory and used it to carry us deeper into war. The defeat they buried away where no one could see it. Until now. This is the story of the Battle of the Drang Valley, which changed the course of American history.
These guys were men. They were young kids, and they were men. You have no idea what they did.
And transformed the hearts and minds of the men who fought there. At the darkest moment of their lives, they stood together. they still do. In a moment, the battle begins. They were young and brave. A special day one continues.
We intend to convince the communists that we cannot be defeated by force of arms. I have today ordered to Vietnam the Air Mobile Division.
In the summer of 1965, the U.S. was still not committed to a full-scale war in Southeast Asia. But President Johnson wanted to escalate the American commitment and introduce the North Vietnamese to a new kind of warfare. Air cavalry, infantry troops transported by helicopter. The U.S. believed this was the fastest, most flexible fighting force in the world. But the enemy was eager to see just how tough these legendary Americans really were. So they followed an old Vietnamese saying, if you want to fight the tiger, you must first lure him out of the mountain. First, they baited the trap. Here, seen publicly for the first time, is the war through enemy eyes, footage from Vietnam's military archives. A U.S. helicopter shot down. North Vietnamese troops pouring along the Ho Chi Minh Trail to the central highlands of South Vietnam. They set up base camps near the Cambodian border and waited. And the tiger came. The 7th Air Cavalry Regiment was ordered to seek and destroy the enemy sanctuaries. The man for the job was Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore.
Did you have any idea how many North Vietnamese were sitting out there waiting?
None whatsoever, no.
Colonel Moore's 1st Battalion had been told to search for the enemy in a remote area along the border called the Drang Valley. Moore decided he would set his helicopters down in a clearing at the base of a mountain range. The clearing was designated Landing Zone X-Ray. The mission was set for November 14th, 1965.
Intelligence that I had was that there was an unknown number of enemy in the vicinity of where I was going to be sent.
The pilot in Hal Moore's lead chopper was Major Bruce Crandall.
We went low level, and the formations are very tight, and we get right down in the treetops.
Bearing is 240 to the LZ.
28 years later, Hal Moore and Bruce Crandall are again finding their way to Landing Zone X-Ray. With them on this journey are the Vietnamese commanders who fought against them in the Drang Valley. Soon, X-Ray is in sight, looking just as it did 3 decades ago.
I was the first guy on the ground in the assault. We had quiet for about 30 minutes.
Remarkably, these scenes were captured by 2 U.S. Army cameramen who were also at Landing Zone X-Ray during Moore's mission.
It was an ominous quiet. I looked up at this mountain, and I knew we were under observation. I just knew it.
What Moore did not know and could not see was that he had landed almost on top of the base camp for hundreds of North Vietnamese soldiers who couldn't quite believe what they were seeing.
I hadn't heard that kind of noise before.
Colonel Vu Dinh Thuc of the Vietnamese People's Army.
We are farmers, so we thought it was tractors. Then I realized what they were. We called them planes that lift straight up. We could see the Americans and how bright red their faces were.
We ran right across this creek bed firing our weapons into these trees and met no resistance. Very happy about that, because I had a whole battalion to bring in.
Moore had one very big problem. X-Ray could only fit enough helicopters to put 80 men on the ground at a time. Moore had to use those few men to protect the landing zone until the rest could arrive.
I ordered my men to cut the Americans off from the helicopters and trap them there.
Standing against Hal Moore was General Nguyen Huan of the People's Army. He'd been hoping the Americans would come to visit.
You cannot fight a tiger in its cave. You must drag it out. So if an enemy force stays on its base, protected by barbed wire and mines, it is difficult to defeat.
As the next wave of troops began to set down in the clearing, some of the men Moore had sent forward returned with a surprise.
We captured a prisoner. He was unarmed, and this prisoner told us there are 3 battalions of North Vietnamese on the mountain, and they want very much to kill Americans and have not been able to find any. And at that point, I knew we were in for it.
3 battalions of North Vietnamese, 1,600 men. The Americans were outnumbered 10-1. Now, protecting the landing zone meant life or death. Moore ordered 2 platoons to push up the mountain. Second Lieutenant Henry Herrick led one of those platoons, and he was much too eager for a fight. Herrick came upon some North Vietnamese scouts and pursued them deeper into the woods. Lieutenant Dennis Deal saw Herrick's platoon pull away.
Henry Herrick had fallen for a 4th grade sucker play by the North Vietnamese. They had hung a couple of people, I guess, out in a clearing, and he took off after him. I don't know why he just didn't shoot him.
It was a trap. Out of contact with the rest of the company, Herrick's platoon was quickly surrounded and attacked. Fighting to stay alive, they became known as the Lost Platoon. Hundreds more of the enemy streamed past the platoon toward the clearing. Hearing the distant gunfire, Moore sent his men forward to meet the assault. Then the battle erupted. 1,600 enemy against, by this point, 150 Americans.
They jump up right in front of you, 5 yards in front of you, 4 yards, hand-to-hand combat. Guys sticking bayonets in each other's chests. It was close. It was close.
In the middle of the fighting was 22-year-old Bill Beck and his best friend Russell Adams. Together, they manned an M60 machine gun.
So you and Russell Adams were right about where the tree was. We were using that tree as cover to the left of us to protect us. You know, when the bullets crack over your head and snap the air and hit the ground beside you, and dust flies and the bark on the tree shatters and breaks off, you know they're aiming at you. That's what happened to Russell Adams.
When the battle was less than an hour old, a bullet split open Adams' helmet and pierced his skull.
And he laid there motionless and tried talking. Nothing would come out. And his eyes were open. He was staring at the sky. And his head was split wide open. And I never seen anything like that in my life. And I was horrified.
Now Bill Beck took over the machine gun alone and put up a furious wall of fire, protecting the company's flank for 2 hours.
When his time came to perform for America and for the men around him, Beck did the job.
28 years later, back at his old position, Beck made a remarkable find.
Look, it's part of a GI helmet. That could be my buddy Russell's, Russell Adams, when he got shot in the head. Look at it, rotted out over 30 years. I don't want to see this guy. I got to take us home. God bless you, buddy.
Russell Adams managed to survive the fight. He and other wounded were taken for treatment to Moore's makeshift command post. More than 50 men were there by the end of that first hour, with a dozen dead piled nearby. Now, Moore sensed the enemy shifting to an exposed part of the clearing, and he made a calculated gamble. He would leave the rear of the clearing completely exposed and protect the area where he thought the enemy would strike. Charlie Company's captain was just landing.
I ran out in the landing zone, was under fire, and I yelled at him to move his company over to the left as quickly as he could and get ready to be attacked. And I hollered at him, move!
We came in here. Our other forces went over there. The plan was to encircle the Americans. Then the order came to attack.
Moore's gamble paid off. His men got to the right place just moments before that assault began.
We realized after a few minutes that it was a standoff.